Hi everyone, welcome to Tales of Dread. Michael worked in the Ohio Pile as a park ranger. State Park in Pennsylvania had seen something that scared him and couldn't be explained. But before we get to today's stories, make sure you hit the like and subscribe buttons, so you can hear more stories about the mysterious and supernatural. Let's go! Someone who used to work as a park ranger sent in the first story. In the early 1990s, Michael worked as a park ranger in Ohio. He had worked there for about a year and a half and had also worked in the park office during that time. A park worker who had worked there for many years told him that he had had similar experiences in the late 1960s. He also met a man who said he had seen a Bigfoot in the park. He said he was riding his bike along a trail when he saw a Bigfoot. He said the creature was sitting by a stream with a deer on its lap. He said he stopped to watch it, and the creature noticed him. They looked at each other for a few moments before the creature stood up. He said it was at least 7 feet tall and had a very muscular build. He said that it started to move toward him, so he pedaled as fast as he could to get away. He said that the creature chased him for a short distance before stopping and running back to the stream. He says it was eating from a large tree limb that had been broken off where the deer's body was, and that it was tearing at the meat and bones with its hands. He said he watched it for a long time, and that it had been eating the deer and squirrels in the area, even though he hadn't seen any small animals in the area for a while. He watched it for a few more minutes. He said that the thing didn't seem to notice him or care about him. He rode away in the end. He said it was reddish-brown and covered with mud and leaves. It was also dirty and smelled bad, he said. But he saw his face clearly. He said the creature had a face that looked a lot like a human's, but its eyes were dark and didn't show any emotion. He also said that he realized later that the creature didn't seem to notice him, but was just eating. He was so scared that he didn't go back to the area for years. Michael has heard that Bigfoot has been seen in the area of the Laurel Highlands, but he has never seen one himself. He has heard a lot of stories about people seeing Bigfoot in Pennsylvania, but this is the only one that happened in Ohio Pile State Park. His co-worker had a very interesting thing happen to him while he was cleaning up a campsite. His co-worker says that while he was working alone, as the sun went down, everything started to get very quiet. At night, there was nothing at all. And he says he feels like someone is watching him. As he cleaned up the area, he said he could hear something moving through the thick brush behind him. When he turned around, there was a dead deer on the ground. At first, he thought it was a coyote, but as he got closer, he saw that it was a bigger animal. As it came out of the bushes, he could see that what he had thought was a coyote was much bigger than he had thought. This thing bent down, grabbed the dead deer, and threw it over its shoulder. The ranger said he was very scared and ran back to the ranger station. He didn't tell anyone, but I think that later that day, another ranger went to the area where he had been working and found all the bushes and tracks torn up. The other ranger who went there later said he didn't see anything, but the area made him feel very scared. This was also where the hiker saw what he was looking for. Could this mean that it was looking for food in this area? Michael wants to know if anyone else has seen the creature in the Laurel Highlands or the Ohio Pile State Park. The next story was sent in by a park ranger who thought he saw Bigfoot in the mid-1990s. He wanted to talk about what happened when he worked as a summer park ranger at the Ohio Pile State Park from 1992 to 1996. Ohio Pile is a beautiful state park in western Pennsylvania's Laurel Highlands. The thing that will be very interesting to the audience. He is talking about my audience because he was a ranger at the East Point picnic area from an office building during his first summer there. There was a short path you could take to get to the back entrance of the area, and another path that led to the creek about a quarter-mile away. Both trails were surrounded by barbed wire, so an animal could only get to them if it could go under a barbed wire fence. For about 4 years, he didn't see anything, even though there were rattlesnakes and springers north of the trail. Most of the time, they saw beavers and turtles, and every so often, they found dead white-tailed deer. In his second summer, strange things started happening more often. At night, he would hear a sound that sounded like a baby fender or didn't have much bass to it. It sounded like when you hit two cones together, but the pitch was much lower. He could sometimes hear prints coming from the south or the west. He started to see prints in the spring and fall. Large steps. The park rangers who worked in that park all year from the south half. Nobody knows about these. They started to hear whistling sounds coming from the woods. Sometimes it sounded like someone was calling their dog. Someone or something with strong lungs made the whistling sound. They hear it, and they hear a bird call that starts and stops suddenly. The whistling didn't sound like a bird, and they started to see what seemed to be the tops of small trees bend over and break off. Not just one or two, but many in different places at the same time. There were a lot of dead deer in the park, but this was different. They were not only finding dead deer, but also deer that had been killed and left to rot in the woods as an offering. They would find these deer in the strangest places. One time, they found one on top of a picnic table. Another time, they found one on the edge of a popular trail. Again, there was no reason for a dead deer to be the eyewitness, and the park ranger in question was then moved to the second year and became a ranger at the North Point picnic area. He then moved into a house trailer with 2 other rangers. On the first night there, they heard a sound that sounded like thunder, then whistling, then the call of a bird, and then it stopped. They heard something big moving through the woods several times. Then they heard something heavy being dragged across the ground. Then they heard something heavy being dropped and dragged again. This went on for a couple of hours. He talked about them as if they had killed an elk and were dragging it around, dropping it, and then dragging it again. Each time all 3 rangers heard it, the sounds got closer to the trailer and they could hear it moving all around. They turned on a big light and shined it out the back of the trailer, but there was nothing there. There were no drag marks in the ground, which they couldn't explain, but they could hear something big moving away. The next night, as soon as they turned on that light, they heard whistling and then a loud cracking sound like a tree being broken off. The next night, they were on the trail when they heard whistling and then saw something tall, brown, and skinny walking towards one of the park rangers. It was standing on 2 legs and seemed to have very long, skinny arms that were reaching out to them. No one could see its face because it was moving so fast. They tried to get a better look, but it was gone before anyone could really see it. Shortly after these events, in the 3rd year, the witness, who was also a park ranger, was moved and became a ranger at Creekside. This campground was beautiful, but at the time, there was no running water and the bathrooms were being fixed or remodeled. The first night they were there, the whistling started up again. It sounded like whatever it was now following this park ranger around, and then they would hear something crash through the woods. It was coming from a bigger, more densely wooded area on the other side of a big creek. The person who saw it wants to say that it was scary. They had a 12-gauge shotgun at the time, but they had to cross a wide, deep creek to get there. He never did, but his boss said he had crossed the creek and found nothing. The next night, the whistling started up again, and they heard a loud crap. Again, he went outside to find out what was going on. This time, the noise was coming from the south. There was a small trail that led into the woods, and even though his gut told him not to, he decided to follow it. As soon as he walks into the woods, he can hear something close by moving quickly toward him, and as he gets closer, he can hear it breathing heavily. He was shocked by what had happened. There was a loud sonic boom, like something heavy had hit a tree, and he could hear something being torn up from the ground and thrown. Bam, something hits the ground, but he can't see what it is without thinking. He goes back into hiding and won't answer any more calls about that trail or patrol after that. But he has heard some pretty crazy stories from better armed Rain who patrolled that area years ago, and they are very similar. Could that possibly be the home of Bigfoot or some other strange animal? Maybe even the Eyewitness's park director, who was in charge of the park for a long time, had some pretty scary stories to tell. But most of all, they have come forward and said that this has been a big problem since the 1970s. So much so that the boss said they talked about shootings even though only a few of them had seen one. Even bigger guns were given to them by the government. After a problem with some campers at one of their other sites in the 1960s. The person who saw it was there for 3 years and heard the sounds of whistling, crashing through the woods, and silence in the woods. After that, they never went back to that part of the park. He said the whistling was almost high-pitched, but it had a deep pitch or timbre to it. It sounded like what a Bigfoot or something else that was very big and had big lungs would sound like. The crashing sounded like a bulldozer or something moving through the woods. The tree or a big branch would be broken off like a stick, and whatever was in it would be thrown. He wasn't sure, but he thinks it was a small fir tree being pulled out of the ground and thrown. He doesn't know how else to explain the loud crash that scared him. The main person who saw this happen says they aren't scared of anything, but this scared them. All of the other park rangers he has talked to have told him similar things, and the one who actually saw it says it was about 8 feet tall. He isn't sure about that, but he knows for sure that what he saw wasn't a person. Our last story in today's video is about a strange series of events that are almost too strange to explain. Let's hear what happened. In 1998, this listener worked with another park ranger at Ohio Pyle State Park. He wanted to write in and talk about what he did there. They wanted to say a few words about them. They had been in the Army for 4 years, and a former police officer was a park ranger at Ohio Pyle State Park until he retired in 1998. Rangers often have to work on holidays, especially around the 4th of July and Labor Day. So, on the Labor Day weekend of 1998, he worked with another ranger named Peter. During their shifts, they kept an eye on the trailheads. They both saw a man dressed in all black walk down the path. He had on this robe that almost looked like a hood. You couldn't see the man's face, but you could tell he was walking down the trail toward the two rangers. They both saw this man walking on the trail, and the ranger was patrolling one of the trailheads at a higher elevation. While his co-worker was patrolling the trailhead closest to Dorman's land, Peter radioed him and asked if he could see the man and how strange he was. He was acting strange and doing strange things. It looked very strange. Something about him just seemed wrong and very strange. As they watched this man walk down the trail, it made both rangers feel bad. Through one of the patrol zones, they noticed that there was something very strange about him. He just stopped showing up. When he walked into the woods, he almost seemed to disappear. The radios of the eyewitness. When Peter went back to ask if he could still see the man, he said that the man had already left. They couldn't figure out how this person could have walked down the trail and then vanished. Even though they were on patrol for a long time, they never saw this man again or found out where he went. We had nowhere else to go. He had to be seen at least a little bit, if not by park rangers then by other hikers. This kind of scared them, but there wasn't much they could do about it. So they let it go, and the next day they were both back at work, this time on one of the other trailheads on the other side. The main person who saw what happened was driving back to the station when Peter radioed him, and told him to get out of his truck and come here right away. He said that a woman was coming down from Doorman's Landing. This happened around 10 a.m. on a busy holiday weekend. He told him to wait a few minutes and he'd be there as soon as possible. The witness remembers driving back to the trailhead and getting out of his truck. As he walked down to the trailhead, he could see a woman walking, and she looked very upset. He could tell she was very upset about something. She couldn't help but look behind her. She was nervous as she walked down the trail. So, the eyewitness asks Peter if he remembers seeing this woman. Peter says he doesn't, so it seems like she just showed up out of nowhere. Both of them try to talk to the girl and ask her if she's all right. She didn't answer, though. She didn't care about either of them and just kept going until she just disappeared in front of them. They were both very confused by this event, but neither of them knew how to explain it. They never saw this woman again. The next day, which was the third day they both worked at the same trailhead, it was the same shifts and patrols as the first day they both worked there. The eyewitness was working on the first when Peter radioed him again to say that there were now two men walking down the trail wearing all black, just like on day one. Peter and the eyewitness moved, so they could see these two men, and they made a disturbing discovery. Both of these men were dressed in all black and wore something that looked like a hood. They can't see anything that looks like a face. I mean, it's just blank, there's nothing there, and all you can see is skin, so whoever it is has no face at all. And he starts to ask him, "Do you see what I see?" Peter is speechless and doesn't know what to say because these people don't have faces. And just like the other two, they just disappear. Long story short, Peter and the witness have no idea how to explain any of this because it was all so strange. He worked there for a few years after this, but I never saw anything like what he had just seen in Ohio Pyle State Park other than his own Twilight Zone episode. That's about as strange as it gets, and he says that after all these years, it still scares him. But what do you think is more important? Don't forget to tell me what you think in the comments. I'd love to know, and if you're new to the channel, make sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons. As always, guys, I love you all. Keep an open mind, and I'll see you in the next episode.